The Democracy That Delivers podcast is brought to you today by the Anti-Corruption and Governance Center at CIPE. This is the podcast where we talk about corruption in its many forms. And now to your host.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Democracy That Delivers podcast. I'm Louisa Tomar, Program Director on the Global Programs team, focused on initiatives at the intersection of technology and democracy. And I'm joined by my co-host, Michelle Crimes, Program Director on the Anti-Corruption and Governance Center, who works on business sustainability at CIPE. We are delighted to have with us the CEO of GEC Risk Advisory, author, and strategic governance expert, Dr. Andrea Bonime-Blanc, to talk about our new publication, The Risk to Value Guide, How Emerging Market Businesses Can Transform New Risks into Value. Thank you for being here, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Louise.
Our listeners can find the Risk to Value Guide on CIPE's website and use it to follow along with us during this conversation. The Risk to Value Guide offers valuable insights for understanding emerging and new business risks, including environmental, social, and governance, plus technology factors, or ESGT, as we'll call it today, and leveraging them into opportunities for better value creation. The guide also includes a checklist that allows mid-sized firms and emerging markets to better understand the complex risks and evolving business landscape they face, including from digital transformation and emerging technologies, and how to get started on their resilience journey. So to start us off, Andrea, I would love for you to tell us more about your professional background and how you got into this line of work.
Well, thank you so much, Louisa and Michelle. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I appreciate your interest and also just having collaborated with you on this piece, which we hope will be very practical and useful to everyone. So my background is one of being a lawyer. I took a JD law degree and a PhD in political science, so I was kind of a punishment early in my career. But both of them really have informed, both of these areas have informed a lot of the work that I've done over the years. I started off as a young attorney doing transactional work on Wall Street, and then I went in-house to several corporations where I was a general counsel, and more drifted towards risk management, crisis management. In one of the companies, I was in charge of environmental health and safety issues. It was a electric power company, global. I also was in charge of cybersecurity at another company, which was a technology company. So I ended up doing a lot of different things that kind of fall in this very big bucket of non-financial risks that have very major financial impacts and implications. And so for me, I've always been very interested in and try to help leaders and boards and others to think about what are those really big systemic or strategic risks that they are living in and working in and developing their business in, and how can we become more aware of those and factor them into our strategy, into our governance, into our risk management, for the purposes of creating greater shareholder and stakeholder value at the end of the day, but also for purposes of building resilience in the difficult times. And here we are in a very difficult moment in history where a lot of things are going on at the same time, and businesses really have to be more alert than ever. So my professional background is legal and then the social sciences. And then I've spent a lot of time doing sort of think tank work, served on some boards, but always with that lens of ethics, risk, what we're calling ESG, but goes further into like sustainability issues, and really trying to get businesses to think more clearly about how important those things are, not only to their bottom line, but also to their stakeholders and their footprint.
Thank you for that. And you also are an author. Can you tell us a bit about your most recent book?
Of course. Thank you for asking, Louisa. So I've been writing since I was a PhD candidate at Columbia University many moons ago. My dissertation was my first book, and it was called Spain's Transition to Democracy. And it's about the politics of constitution making. And it was really all about how do countries move from being maybe in the authoritarian space to more democratic space. And I wrote that back in the 80s when there was a lot of movement towards democratization around the world, in Latin America, in Eastern Europe, in parts of Asia and Africa. And so that was a very important part of how I would look at things. And so that was my first book. And after that, I have edited and or written or co-written maybe 4 or 5 other books. My last one was called Gloom to Boom: How Leaders Transform Risk into Resilience and Value. And the idea there, it's a really pretty lengthy book. The idea there is to take leaders on a journey navigating through their most important risks and opportunities. And that's one of the pieces of the puzzle that I'm always trying to emphasize, both in my work and in my writings. And that is, for every risk, there's opportunity or multiple opportunities and or multiple facets to the risk. And so what we need to do is understand and bucket those risks into the environmental, the social, the governance, the technology, and others. And so in that book, I have a chapter each on those major categories, and then I have chapters at the end helping leaders to understand where they fit from an organizational resilience standpoint and how these things can also not only protect value, but create value and protect, the downsides, of course. So that's my latest book.
Thank you for telling us a little bit about that. Your book is, I think, required reading for a lot of the work that both Louisa and I engage in. And so this is why this is such a wonderful opportunity for us to talk with you, because both in your book and in the Risk to Value Guide, you talk about ESG megatrends. Can you tell us a little bit more about those trends? How do you identify them? Where can our listeners learn more about them?
Thank you very much for that question, Michelle. So I start the book. This was the first time I was thinking this way. The book starts with a chapter called The 10 Megatrends of Our Turbulent Times. And I wrote the book in 2019, and it was published in late 2019, 2020, or right before COVID hit. And already back then, we could see a lot of multi-year megatrends, and I think of them as multi-year things that are happening, strategic, systemic things that are happening globally, but with impacts locally and with impacts for each organization, each business. Those megatrends, I've now reduced them to 5 because I think we need to focus on what's really most important, right? Prioritize. And so for the last 3 years, I've written an annual megatrends manual, we call it, with Diplomatic Courier, and it comes out in May. I'm writing the one that's coming out this May as we speak. I have a big deadline that I have to make shortly. And really what I try to do with these megatrends is highlight the most important big topics that leaders of all kinds, whether they're business leaders, governmental, NGO, et cetera, need to be aware of. They have to have the situational awareness of these important issues and trends so that they can then factor them in both as risks and opportunities into their strategy, into their governance, et cetera, and value protection and what have you. So just to give you a very quick idea, there's like 5 categories of megatrends. One is about geopolitical change. Another one is about change in capitalism, stakeholder capitalism. Where are we going? And by the way, all of this is sort of future oriented. So the megatrends are intended to give you a view of a year to 2 years from now of what we think, what I think are the important megatrends. And by the way, I draw on some very erudite sources. It's not just my opinion. It's World Economic Forum, Allianz Risk Barometer, and a whole bunch of other really great resources, Council on Foreign Relations, et cetera, et cetera. And those megatrends are things that are happening, that are continuing to happen and evolve. And so from year to year, the megatrends will change in complexion. There will be new things that are happening. For example, last year, geopolitical tectonic changes was my top megatrend because of the Russia war, all the implications that came with it, et cetera. The second one was about complex interconnected risk, which draws a lot on the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report, but many other sources. And this year I've switched, I'm writing it right now, but this year I've switched the order where the complex interconnected risks category is my number 1 category. And I'm emphasizing social and biological issues there, the societal issues, the climate, the biodiversity. Those are some of the biggest systemic risks all of us are confronting in different ways around the world. And so I'm highlighting that as my first one this year. Geopolitics comes a very quick second this year. And then I have a third megatrend that looks at leadership trust issues, which is a very, very heavy duty, important mega trend, and there's a lot of degradation in trust in our leaders, be they governmental or business or NGO institutions. And that degradation of trust is breaking up the glue that keeps societies, peaceful and prosperous and what have you. And so this is another really important megatrend. Then I have, so I mentioned complex risks, geopolitical. I mentioned the trust issue. Then there's stakeholder capitalism, or whatever other kind of capitalism we seem to be moving towards. And within that category, there are all these different issues having to do with sustainability, with climate change, with what is the responsibility of business versus government versus society, et cetera, the whole ESG debates that are going on. That's the fourth category. And then finally, but although it's not the last one that I deal with, it's actually the third one this year, is technological disruption. How technology as a major megatrend is disrupting everything on a daily, on a minute-by-minute basis. And so this year, suddenly ChatGPT and generative AI is becoming like the big focus of everybody, and how it might disrupt everything. Some people talking about it as if it's as big or maybe bigger than when we had the change from no internet to internet. So, but that's just one example of many technological disruptions that are taking place that we need to pay attention to. It's affecting every day. And embedded in some of that is the disinformation, misinformation, debacles that we're seeing through social media, through the explosion of information. That's both a trust issue and a technology issue, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think I'll stop because I've been talking for too long.
No, I don't think you've been talking for too long. This is really great, because I think one of the things that's really great about our guide and that what we've been working on is that it has a really important and sort of right at the cutting edge context, right? And you're laying out what that context is for all of us. And you're sort of highlighting the main things, but it's important, I think, for listeners who may not be as familiar to really understand what this context is, why we think it's important. I think another thing that could be important for them to understand is right now for business, why is business suddenly, well, maybe seems suddenly to others, but certainly not suddenly to us, but why is business interested in suddenly in these issues of sustainability, of technology, of trust? What makes this more important now than it has been in the past?
I think we're living in the word is overused, but unprecedented times. The last 20 years, frankly, this century has seen so much condensed and rapid and converging change, and technology is driving most of that. But then we also have the piece of climate, which we cannot ignore anymore. We ignored it for the last 20 or 30 years of the 20th century. We cannot ignore that anymore because it's, even if we're selfish about our own business or our own family or our own location, these things are happening to all of us. These are not anymore, it's some distant location that's getting a hurricane, or some drought is happening somewhere where I don't have family, so I don't really care. We can't think like that anymore. And so the climate piece has become overwhelming. We've seen all kinds of climate impacts everywhere for the last few years, especially. So that's one very big reason why business has to pay attention, because naturally they are dependent on supply chains, transportation, weather conditions, the availability of talent and personnel, et cetera, et cetera. The whole business continuity piece has become super important. Crisis management has become super important. So that's one layer. The technology piece is just an explosive, outsized layer. The social media, democratization of information access to a great extent. Not everybody has cell phones and social media, but a lot of people do. Then add to that explosion of technology the infiltration of disinformation and misinformation into that democratization of information. And you have an explosion of lies, an explosion of untrustworthiness, a lot of bad actors taking advantage of that to sell things, to steal things that aren't real, or that, we have the whole crypto situation going on now, which may have good sides to it, but it also has a lot of the negative stuff, the corruption, the money laundering, et cetera, the national security issues where, North Korea, for example, has just, I think there was $1.6 billion in crypto Bitcoin that recently was announced in the news, that they have been able to steal from whatever locations and sources. And so we have this explosion of ability, of convergence of things, technology driven, social media driven. And I think in addition to that, the decline in trust. So climate, technology, and the decline in trust, with business actually maybe picking up a little more trust than they used to, because the stakeholders, the employees, the customers are more vociferous about saying, hey, we don't want a contaminated product. We don't want something that is going to hurt our environment. We don't want to patronize a company that sells us lies, et cetera, et cetera. So there's more activism amongst some of the stakeholders, including shareholders, by the way. It's not just, the other stakeholders. The shareholders are much more active and much more the rise of all these ESG funds. Some of it is greenwashing, but some of it is also a reflection of the need for climate-friendly bonds and products and services and so on and so forth. So this has all come together in the last 20 years. I would even say the last 10 years. And so business cannot ignore this. They ignore at their peril. And so if you don't understand how those things affect your footprint as a business, both virtual and physical, you will not be prepared for the climate event and the supply chain disruptions, or you won't be prepared for the disinformation or misinformation that might be fed about your products or services, or the attacks by the stakeholders who want more from you or are looking to the competitive pressures. If you're in a sector where someone else is doing it really well, they're going to attract the customers and the employees, and you're going to lose them. And therefore, you may lose your business. So I think there's just a heightened need for situational awareness and for understanding how that attacks and addresses your particular footprint as a business. So if you're not aware, you're negligent, and you're also losing value. You might lose value very abruptly because you're not innovating properly, or you might just lose value over time because you're not prepared for the competitors that are going to take your markets and take your customers, et cetera.
Andrea, I want to follow up on that point because I think you lay out really well what are many complex risks facing businesses across the globe. But one of the things in our new guide that I think will be really valuable to business is how you talk about those businesses being aware of and managing those risks is an opportunity in and of itself, and is an opportunity to create more value. Can you talk a bit about what that means from your perspective?
Sure thing. So my corporate experience, I ranged from being with a really small startup, a larger startup, part of a much larger corporation, and then also a couple of big companies that were global. And so I've seen kind of the full range of what you need at these different stages of development or size, footprint, et cetera, and all different industries as well. What I think is often lacking, even in the bigger companies, are a couple of things that help structure the company so it's prepared for understanding its risks, managing its risks, and then converting that into value creation. So a basic risk management structure with a corporate head. For example, in a couple of the smaller companies that I worked, I was general counsel, but then I ended up doing the risk management committee, and I also did crisis management and worked closely with auditors. And so creating some of those internal systems to help identify the risks, integrate them into your thinking and your planning and your strategy, and then also understanding when there are lessons learned, for example, from a crisis or from a risk gone wrong, that you're actually taking those lessons and either improving your processes or improving your products and services. And so if there are problems that have come up with customers, with your products, and you're not paying attention to that, you are losing value right then and there. If you incorporate those lessons learned into your processes and into the way you look at risk, way you mitigate risk, and the way you incorporate innovation into your products and services, you are not only protecting the value that you've created and you're creating, but you may actually add value because suddenly you've made a product more safe, let's say, than it was, and maybe safer than what your competitor is doing. And the customer will see that and say, oh, I want company A's product. I don't want company B because company B didn't incorporate these quality or these safety processes or enhancements that I need for my safety. Could be food, for example. It could be something else. So for me, risk management structures that are tied closely to strategy, that take into account the situational awareness I was talking about before of what is going on in your world. Have an executive, have someone in your firm who's really studying, your supply chain. Where's it coming from? What are the countries it's going through? What are the potential dangers that exist through that supply chain? Should we diversify our supply chain to a second country or a third country because there's potential civil unrest in country A? That kind of thinking has to be incorporated into business strategy. And so risk management, being aware of sort of geopolitical events taking place in your footprint and your supply chain, and then also having good crisis management, business continuity processes in place, because it's not if, it's when you're going to have another crisis. We're living in what the World Economic Forum called this year a polycrisis period, multiple crises, and they're happening and they're going to continue to happen. Some may be bigger than others, but we are not in a easy flowing kind of time in the world's history. We're in a difficult time. So get prepared, have those processes in place, have talented people who can do this in your company, use outside talent when you need it, and prepare yourself, and you will be building that sort of resilience muscle that we all need as people and as organizations in this really turbulent world.
Oh, thank you for really sort of laying that out for us and helping, I hope, the listeners to really understand why the context, again, of this guide, why it is important, and how hopefully they can use it to guide themselves as they also start to think about and address these issues. One of the things you talk about a lot in the guide, which is sort of tied to this idea of specifically of sort of trust in business, is about the importance of leadership. And I wonder if you could sort of, and I know I've heard you talk about this as well in a couple of other different spaces, but I wonder if you could talk about sort of what are some of the traits or some of the actions that you see in successful leaders and successful companies. Are there anything that you would highlight for some of our listeners and things that people could go and take a look at and sort of think about how does this connect to their own leadership style and their own challenges?
Thank you, Michelle. I think it all begins and ends with leadership, good, bad, and ugly. And so, and I've seen it in my career at least. And certainly, we see it in the headlines on a daily basis. So I think, when you have emotionally intelligent leadership, meaning a CEO that really is thinking about this situational awareness and understands the kind of team that they have to have in place, and also is factoring these things into their business strategy, the stakeholder issues, employees, customers, marketplace, you have a much better chance of setting a good tone from the top that then influences the entire culture of the organization. Then when you have someone who's more narrow-minded, more simply financial goals oriented, for example, where some of these other things that are really important to factor in really for financial bottom line as well, but also for the well-being and culture of, the stakeholders who care about your organization, your business and your products, et cetera. Those kinds of business leaders are going to, I think, and there's studies out there. I mean, I cite a number of these in my Gloom to Boom book. We mentioned some of this in the Risk to Value Guide. There's a lot of data out there and a lot of studies by preeminent organizations that show that these kinds of leaders have a better impact on value creation, value preservation, and growth. When you have leaders that are more narrow-minded, or even worse, when they're, the narcissistic kind of leaders that are really out there more for themselves than for their shareholders even and stakeholders, this is a serious, serious value destruction potential. And I think the other thing that I harp on all the time, and I will continue to forever, is what kind of governance structure does this company have? Is there a board in place that is actually a real board, a check and balance on the CEO? Or is it a board that is either dominated by the CEO or just sitting back and, listening, but not really being responsible and exercising proactive oversight, which I think is really important in today's world. I think boards of companies, big and small, all over the world, really have to think about moving from this traditional pattern of I sit on a board to I serve on a board. I serve because I'm there. I'm getting paid most of the time. I'm getting paid one way or another to oversee the well-being of this company, meaning I have to oversee the CEO's work or the president's work, the executive team's work. How are they doing things? Are they doing them in a holistic way, taking into account some of the things that we talked about with the megatrends and other things? Or are they really just purely focused on the quarterly financial returns and their bonus and their stock options and all this? It has to be a more holistic thing. I don't care where you are in the world. It really doesn't make a difference. And so to me, the board has to be more independent, more proactive, and it has to contain more people that are familiar with and or expert in some of the really big ticket issues of our time. I'm talking technology. I'm talking climate. I'm talking social issues. You want to have people on board, on any board, who are familiar with cybersecurity or digital transformation, or how do we create a more technologically nimble company that is going to create new markets and new products and services. That's who we want on a board. We do not want, I hate to put it this way, but the more senior retired CEOs and CFOs who are really there for the country club experience. It's really much more of a hard work, roll your sleeves up work, of course, collegially, and the design and, components of the board have to be done well as well, appropriate for the company, appropriate for the sector, appropriate for the footprint. If you're a multinational company and you're doing, most of your business comes from, let's say from India and Australia, and all you have is people based in the UK who are all English, that's not going to help you very well to understand India and Australia. So maybe have a board member or two or three or four who are from other parts of the world. Diversity, gender diversity, racial diversity, the diversity that you need for your company to be able to perform at its best. And so to me, these are really important things that boards are not doing well yet. Some are making little movements in that direction, but as a person who realized late in life that I was a change agent, I would say I'm impatient about this, and the world is impatient about it. So we really need to adapt our boards, our governance, and our oversight of CEOs and leaders to the world as it exists and will exist, not as it used to exist before 1999.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea. I think you gave our readers a lot to think about and consider. And I would encourage all of our listeners to go to CIPE's website at www.cipe.org to have a look at the risk to value guide, read through it. It has a lot of additional information on what these risks are and how to address them and turn them into value. Andrea, as you know, Michelle and I are huge fans of your work and are so grateful to have had the opportunity to work with you on this project. And thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to speaking with you again soon. And for all our listeners, you can find more information about Andrea and following her on Twitter and learning about her company by visiting our website and downloading the guide. So thank you all and have a wonderful day.
Democracy That Delivers has been brought to you by the Center for International Private Enterprise. For more information, please visit cipe.org.